Hello again, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. This is the eighth episode of NERP's webinar series. My name is Ayub Sharifi, and I am an associate professor here at the Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability. I will be your moderator for today's session. So today's talk, the title is SDG Framework as a Core of Development Diplomacy. And the speaker is Professor Jayashri Roy. Before we start, I would like to briefly explain the structure of this webinar. After having the welcome remarks from the NERF president, Professor Kaneko, there will be a presentation by Professor Roy. It will take about 20 to 30 minutes. Following the presentation, there will be about 15 minutes for your questions and remarks. And I would like to also encourage you to use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to type in your comments. And also during the Q&A session, you can raise your hands if you have more questions. So please also kindly mention your title and your affiliation when adding your comments. Now I'd like to invite Professor Kaneko, the Director of NERPS, for the welcome remarks and also a brief introduction to the Network for Educational Research and Peace and Sustainability. Professor Kaneko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ayov. So hi, everybody. My name is Kaneko. I'm Director of NERPS. I'm very pleased to have this, our 8th NERPS webinar series today. And this NERPS webinar series focuses on the relationship between peace and sustainability in a context of environment and socio-political and economic and technological transformations. The Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability, NERPS, at Hiroshima University in Japan is hosting a series of webinars on the relationship of this peace and sustainability. And this series is situated within the urgent need to deal with the implication of global change, including the current COVID-19 pandemic for peace and sustainability. The webinar session serves as a platform for rethinking and updating the current discourse on peace and sustainability amidst these global challenges and transformations. And leading expert will discuss the role of resources, digital technologies, migration, governance, and education and peace building, conflict mitigation, humanitarian aid, and capacity building, among other components that contribute the achievement of the sustainability development goals. Particularly, our interest is around on the goal 16, on peace, justice, and strong institutions. At NERPS, we have a major interest in doing research and outreach activity related to these SDGs. And although we are mainly focused on goal 16, we understand the significance of interaction between different goals. And in this regard, today's talk is very timely and important as it elaborates the interaction between goal 13, in particular on climate action, goal 5 on gender and equality, and then goal 16 on peace and sustainability. And we are very happy to have an extremely prominent scholar in this particular area of research, Professor Jayashree Roy. She's currently a professor at the Asia Institute of Technology in Bangkok, but then she has been long established career in the field of energy, environment, and economics nexus. Especially, she serves the researchers for IPCC activities and so on. So we are very looking forward to having her with her. I mean, the talk on this topic from Professor Jayashree, and then interactions. So I really appreciate and all of your participation, and then look forward having a very productive discussion. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I'm thankful to the Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability of Hiroshima University for giving me this opportunity to speak on a thematic area which I believe will dominate the discourses in this century. How peace can be delivered within the planetary boundary is the question that needs to be solved. What is common in climate action and peace are the scale and nature of the outcome. Peace is global good for providing sustainable living service. And climate system is also a global good, providing global life support system. Climate change and its destabilizing effects through disaster, distress migration, exacerbating inequity are now scientifically well established. If there is less disaster led losses, then there will be more financial resources for climate response actions. If there is more climate response actions, then there will be less climate change, less disasters, less losses and damages, less vulnerability, less conflicts, and more of global peace. So, climate change response actions for mitigation and adaptation enhance peace by reducing destabilizing factors. Both climate actions and peace needs global scale coordination, coordinated action in an otherwise fragmented world. In one of our publications in 2019 of annual review of environment and resources, we reviewed the existing knowledge on sustainable living in an attempt to bridge the debate on north-south divide in lifestyle and consumption. Conclusion was that in managing climate change, it is not only about individual sustainable living, but what matters is the collective sustainable living and across generations. We know such value of collective sustainable living gets reflected in values of extended family, tribe and community solidarity, human and non-human interrelationships for harmonious, peaceful, spiritual and material coexistence. We could get from cultures related concepts, just to mention a few, as ahimsa or nonviolence in India, buen vivir in South America for well living, Ubuntu, a humanist African philosophy, Haura in well being in New Zealand, Shiawaze, feeling of delight, and ikigai in Japan, devoting oneself to pursuit of fulfillment of purpose in life. Each of these can enrich understanding of peace and sustainable living as long-term collective action for sustainable development and reducing climate change. Question is why we need to talk about both climate action and peace now? Because the 2021 to 2030 decade is a landmark decade for multiple reasons. Conflicts, unrest, insurgency, armed conflict, rise of military power are increasing every day side by side with the destabilizing impact of COVID-19 on multiple dimensions. But we cannot forget the collective political promises made by the world leaders in 2015. Promise was to deliver the 17 interconnected sustainable development goals without any region or people being excluded. The Paris Climate Agreement to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level, and the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. These international frameworks aim at shifting collective global policy priorities for continuous developmental action by 2030, which can set the world order on a path of long-term peace domestically and internationally. It is now well understood that 21st century reality is going to be determined by the state of the climate system. The extremely important role of climate system is becoming more and more clear. IPCC special report on global warming on 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level is able to attribute now approximately 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature over pre-industrial level to human-induced climate change. Many adverse impacts on multiple aspects of human life and nature, for example, water, forests, sea level, and so on, are already visible. Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia are going to be severely impacted. In this altered system, every bit of warming, additional warming matters. Adaptation to higher and higher temperature is impossible, both for human and non-human systems. For sustaining well-being on Earth, we need to act now. It is becoming extremely important what economic development model each country adopts in post-COVID-19 recovery period will determine what is going to be the state of the climate. We need to make 2021 to 2030 a decisive decade so that 2020, which has become a turning point of global greenhouse gas emissions, continues and should steadily decline to reach 2050 net zero emission target. There are various transformative pathways compatible with mid-century net zero scenario getting developed by the scientists. But without going into the details, the bottom line is massive, unprecedented shifts in various economic sectors like energy supply, energy demand, mobility sector, human settlement design, food production and consumption, forest and land use pattern need to happen in a very short period of time at an accelerated pace. There is widespread concern that rapid transformation may exacerbate inequality and reinforce injustices, particularly for almost half of the world population who have not been the beneficiaries of development process so far and thus need special attention for managing climate action peacefully. What we need to be conscious of while deciding on climate actions. You see, the consumption level of top 1% of global population emits 15% of global emission, while consumption of bottom 90% emits only 48%. Inequality is a major barrier for peace. Violence is more in unequal societies. So we are starting in a decade when there has been much debate on what population growth in developing countries will mean for global consumption and carbon emissions in the decade ahead. While equally strong argument is developed world must manage its consumption responsibly to provide space for poor to achieve sustainable living standards. But this issue will need deeper scientific analysis and further conversations. It is important to resolve this by bringing it up in global debate rather than pushing it under the carpet. IPCC report clearly shows, and many new scientific studies are getting published and showing that a decent living for all human population on Earth can be met without adversely impacting the climate system. So the question is about collective sustainable living. And in our 2019 ARER publication, we propose a just consumption approach. By just consumption approach, we contrast it to the sustainable consumption approach, because in the sustainable consumption approach, there is a literature which is showing through big technology transformation how this sustainable consumption can be managed. But our argument is that such big technology transformation managed by only few, which through inherent exclusionary principle leads to miniaturization of other human beings, and which leads to not inclusive but exclusive development path. And sustainable development path needs to be inclusive, which is a primary condition. So in this decade, sustainable development goals go hand in hand with pursuing dignified sustainable living for all agenda. Now, question is how to strengthen the actions for collective sustainable living. Past century faced two world wars, which are global bads and need to be avoided. So in this century, one good news is that compared to the past century, international diplomacy has also shifted from using hard power to soft power, applied along multiple dimensions such as trade relation, economic cooperation or sanctions, and developmental cooperation. The Sustainable Development Goals provide a broader scope for developmental diplomacy. They allow for actions that are not limited to governmental initiatives alone, but can also be taken by educational and cultural institutions and individuals. Cultural diplomacy can help to strengthen and achieve multiple sustainable development goals through the exchange of ideas and information, capacity building, scientific and business cooperation, and private and multinational investments. Art, literature, music, sports can enhance global solidarity, partnership, and cooperation during the post COVID-19 recovery period. Now, soft power can play a big role in the post pandemic recovery process, helping to avoid conflicts. Whether the SDGs will be achieved by 2030 will depend on what happens in the developing countries in South and Southeast Asia and Africa. Sustainable development goals provide a broader scope for development diplomacy for peace. Sustainable development is conditional on climate action and having robust international relations. So climate action and climate actions like mitigation and adaptation are the new developmental actions. So it is important to understand what kind of climate actions are advancing the sustainable development goals and what can be avoided through mid-course correction mechanism during this century. As we know, approximately half of the world population are women. Now, Sustainable Development Goal 5 aims to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Now, gender inequality, which we today see, is inherited from historical socioeconomic developmental processes. So when recently what we did, we wanted to write an article where we examined more than 400 full research articles and found that adaptation projects led by women in some countries are helping in advancing adaptation and gender equity. But in some projects, still continuing to be gender blind. For example, in Bangladesh, women are succeeding in freshwater aquaculture through training and knowledge. But in most of the commercial scale aquaculture projects in various regions exclude women. In mangrove restoration projects in Tanzania, women's participation is very limited as they lack access to information about the adaptation projects themselves. In accessibility to mobile phone ownership, formal knowledge, and information system, including early warning system, increases women's exposure to risk during disaster and adversely impact their capacity to respond to climate change impacts. Now, in many countries, payment for ecosystem services are emerging as a solution for nature-based solution, but payment for ecosystem service based on property size as a forest protection measure reduces women's income compared to men. As for mitigation actions in IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming over pre-industrial level, we did a review of 1,000 literature and we found very limited literature which looks into the impact of mitigation action and SDG 16. There are some literature, however, which clearly shows how capacity building, knowledge sharing, training, and technology sharing, strong institution building have helped in scaling up energy efficiency initiatives globally today. And energy efficiency, you know, is a necessary condition for achieving mitigation. Although it is not sufficient, there are many more things needs to be done. So the knowledge creation and sharing through academic research collaboration are the most effective means to develop soft power diplomacy through a bottom-up process. We have published how from collaborative research outcomes, bilateral soft power diplomacy standing on science, knowledge, and human capacity building between the two neighbors, Bangladesh and India, can emerge in the fields of energy, water, and natural disasters through strategic cooperation. While local farmers in Bangladesh in 2007 suffered from a 2007 flood, suffered enormous loss and damage because they planted 160 days variety of paddy. But in India, farmers practice 90-day and flood-resistant rice varieties for a very long time. So there are many more such examples to share for developmental cooperation under Sustainable Development Framework among the neighboring and regional countries. So digging out all these possibilities can strengthen the soft power diplomacy in climate change and peace building regionally. Indian diplomacy conducted e-capacity building programs for Africa and other developing countries during pandemic, which fits into the SDG framework across multiple sustainable development goals. Now, providing a platform for academia to discuss, brainstorm, and find solutions to problems with common benefit for enhancing human well-being can pave the way for peace and prosperity. I congratulate the initiative by Network for Education and Research on Peace because it is the education sector is charged with a responsibility to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. I will quote here Sustainable Development Goal 4.7 with a purpose in mind because it says by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. We need to revisit sustainable development goals and need to go beyond sustainable development goal 16 alone and include such other SDG targets and indicators, which as a comprehensive framework can provide us a working frame in this decade to provide solutions for two global common goods, climate action and peace, to prevent catastrophic consequences for us and for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Roy. This was very informative, and I think you helped us better understand that when we talk about SDGs, we need to consider the interactions between different SDGs, and also the way you pictured how different SDGs, especially climate action and those SDGs related to equity, to gender equality, they may directly and indirectly affect peace dynamics and help overcome conflicts. And it's also good that we heard from you that over the past 2-3 decades, we as humans have learned to somehow use soft power instead of hard power and try to solve some of these issues through collective action. And I think one thing that I learned is that if we continue building on this collective actions and also take more transformative actions, we will have more chances to also further prosper in the future and try to achieve some of those development goals. So now the floor is open for comments and questions from the audience. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat box. It's at the bottom of the screen. So while we're waiting for the questions, okay. Sarah, could you please type in your question? Because this is a webinar and unfortunately we don't have the option to open your microphone. So if you could please type in your question, that would be helpful. So while we're waiting for the questions, I was just wondering, like, while we have lots of opportunities, what challenges do you think might need to be overcome to further to speed up the actions towards like better engagement between peace and climate action and also the other SDGs? Because there might be some challenges locally and also globally.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it is extremely important that the developmental actions which are having negative impacts on the different sustainable development goals, right? As I mentioned, only in case of suppose some of the actions like gender-based adaptation projects, which are ignoring the gender participation, right? So they are commercializing the activities, which is giving more income to the families, but not to the not making it gender equitable, right? So such actions we need to identify. So I think there is a huge importance not only talk of the opportunity, but now to look for these challenges. what is leading to more inequality? As I said, in Bangladesh, due to flood, and just because of the selection of the seed variety, they are losing their livelihood and the income security. So, but there are all known technologies available around the world and in neighboring countries, but we are not exchanging these. How to facilitate this? How to make it happen, right? I always say that if we take the example of energy efficiency, how it percolated throughout the world, how policy changes, because there was a lot of push globally and also from the national level, there was an uptake and that happened. Why? Because there was a lot of discussion, a lot of academic discourses and business models which came up. So I think we really need to make more business model, more business sense out of these mitigation and adaptation actions. And this should be taken as a new economic activity. So when I'm saying that um, peace is global good, and also when I'm saying that, say for example, that climate action is a global good, which simply means that we need to consider these in accounting for the economic progress, because as of now the our GDP indicator is incomplete to consider many of these environmental benefits which are showing up. So how we can include these within the, or we can augment the GDP framework and consider different metric for measuring progress, then only we will be able to see many more activities which can advance peace and um, climate action.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. So we have the first question now. Uh, so the question is that, do you think inequalities or even uh, are inevitable to any transformation to change? So I think you addressed some of this inequality related issues, but if you could further elaborate on how inequalities may be a kind of mm, obstacle to transformation.
Yeah. So let me say that, let me give this example because this is a very recent research which we have been doing. So when we were looking into Bangladesh economy, we saw that the social, so if we consider that there are three pillars of development, right? One is economic pillar, another is social pillar, and the other one is environmental development. Bangladesh is the only country which achieved social indicators faster than the economic indicators. So they solved the social issues faster. So what they did, I'll give one example of their policy, right? So what they did was they made it a point that if any female account holder in a bank has a sole ownership of the account, then they will be given a higher rate of interest compared to others. That gave more empowerment, and that made the female members to come and open up their own banking account. So what it meant is that they made them brought into the formal economic activity, right? So as soon as you bring them into the formal economic activity, you are mainstreamed. Otherwise, they are marginalized. So these are the kind of, because these are very local specific problems. These are not global problems, right? So how you identify these local problems and how you integrate those into your development packages through policy framing, through business model are very important. And there, the role of academic institutions are very, very high because they can take up this research, they can bring this forward, and in any change, you know, there is a likely chance of winner and gainers. So the only advantage in this case of climate change is that we know who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers. Because for a long time, this is a slow moving process. And so we know along our pathway. So this is providing us a chance to address inequality. So that's why I said this century and this decade is extremely important. How we make decisions completely differently than what we used to do in the past.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes, I think that has addressed the question very perfectly. So let me ask some more questions. You mentioned that for IPCC, you have looked at a lot of literature, over 1,000, and there is very limited work on how mitigation may contribute to peace or vice versa. I was wondering, like, if we may further work on this, because I think at NERPS as well, we also did some brief literature review last year, and we noticed that there's a big gap here. So I was wondering, like, if you have any ideas, for instance, through like sharing renewable technologies or creating platforms for renewable energy based collaboration, cooperation between different countries or between different local areas, how like we can further improve this connection between mitigation and peace.
I think if we can come up with some indicators of peace and some indicators, because we know the mitigation, right? So if we can come up with some indicators of peace or lack of peace within a particular region or whichever countries we are choosing, and then we try to address that so that, you know, there is a kind of target setting and then achieving that. Because one thing I notice now that, you know, the sustainable development goals all are not encompassing the need of that particular completely. Because of course it could not be with 169 indicators also, it could not be complete, right? So there are many more. So I think it is task for us now to identify those, right? Say for example, why there is lack of why there is more migration, I mean push migration from rural areas to urban areas, why there is more push migration from cross border, right? And which are creating stress on other parts, because there is lack of access to electricity. And that's why for say cold storage and for irrigation, and so there is less failure in the agriculture sector, so people are migrating. This is one example I'm giving. So what it simply means is if we identify these, and local experts know these, so if we can collaborate cross country and can find out such things, then, you know, in different sectors we can identify, because there are almost, I can say that majorly 6 sectors where we can really focus. And in those, among those, we can choose any one sector, as you said, the energy sector. And then we can see that, okay, so what is the mitigation action and what is the adaptation implication for that, right? Or say offshore wind or anything, we can just take up all these and then do the exercise so that we can show how peace indicators will be progressing as well as the mitigation, so that how peace and climate action can come together through scientific collaboration, understanding, and then take it at the diplomatic level so that the politically this can happen. So that, you know, the soft power that binds, it doesn't divide. That's why I say this is a global good, right? It doesn't divide, and we need that now more and more.
Right, great. So now we have 2 more questions. One is from Nan Luo, and the question is that, do you think the developed countries and developing countries can express and pursue their interests under the same set of norms of sustainable development? I mean, for instance, Africa and Europe certainly see sustainable development with different perspectives, and developed actors see energy challenge more as an environmental issue, while Africa highlight the problem of energy poverty. So how do you see the differences between these?
Yeah, because um, we are if we take any time slice, right? Say take it today, or even last year or any year. If we take a time slice, then we know we are not all standing on the same platform. Our starting points are very different, right? Because our starting points are different, so our needs are also different. So we need to see that what needs are basic and which needs to be satisfied, and then we need to look for others. So for some who are standing at a lower pedestal, they need to come to the higher pedestal, right? And so the developed and developing countries, because their achievement levels are different, standing at any time slice, definitely the pathways will be different. And there lies the beauty of sustainable development agenda, that it allows diversity in pathways, multiple pathways. It recognizes that there are multiple pathways and they need to converge. But the sole goal should be that, okay, so what are the planetary boundaries? How we can provide less conflict. So these are the constraints within which we should be working. So if my decision harms someone else, then I should be revisiting my decision, and I should be thinking how alternatively I can meet these. So I think there will be differences in the pathways. That's not a problem, so long we consider others within our decision making process. It's not about individual, it's about collective living.
Yeah, that's very important actually, and I believe like this soft power diplomacy and how it's evolving, we now coming to recognize this need, and probably there will be more collaboration with developing countries in the future, uh, because I think a lot of developed countries, most of them now understand that we're on the same boat. So
Mhm.
these issues cannot be solved
Yeah.
unilaterally.
Mhm.
So we have another question from Aki Yonehara. And let me just read the question. She says, thank you very much for the stimulating lecture. I appreciate that Dr. Roy mentioned the need for multi-areas cooperation, and ESD could be a key. The question is, how can we develop such a platform for multi-stakeholders from different areas to cooperate in practice? And such platform might be necessary at local, regional, and global levels respectively. And United Nations can be called a global platform. In a practical sense, it is often more difficult to make such a platform function at a local level because different stakeholders' interests tend to conflict more sharply. So I think the question is that how to deal with those uh, different interests of different stakeholders and to reduce the conflicts between them.
Mhm. Sometimes, I think that from 1970 onwards, there was a kind of complacency that the technology will be developed by someone and they will be selling it and giving it to us, and then we will be able to solve the problem. So, as a consumer, also, we became very complacent that things will be served to us. So, we all were thinking someone will serve me my needs. So we became more passive actors. So what this climate change is bringing forward is that each one of us need to be very active actors. It's not that someone will serve me the solution. I have to find the solution. So from that point of view, I'm also a stakeholder. So my job, say for example, if I'm a university teacher, I need to look into my local problem and then try to connect it to the global issue, and then see that what I can do in this local specific problem to solve and connect it to the global problem. So there are multiple examples of such where these social innovation projects have been worked on. So we should not be thinking only of technological innovation as the solution. We should be talking of social innovation also. So any technology brings in a social practice. So how do we bring this culture and new change into the societal structure? And educational institution has the highest role to play in that. And most important, so I think, I mean, role of education in peace and sustainability is intrinsically related. So if I go by my standard Nielsen score for looking into connection with SDGs, then I will say that education has the highest score for pushing this agenda of sustainability and peace.
Mm-hmm. And that's like education across different generations, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We found, that in South Pacific island states, the older generation women actually worked with the younger women to pass on the traditional methods of seed preservation and agricultural practices, which are more resilient to climate change. And that's how the knowledge transferred. So it was a simple transfer process, but this is how you bring together people and then share the knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have time for a few more questions, so please feel free to raise your questions if you have any questions or comments. We welcome your comments and questions. So while we're waiting for further questions, let me also bring up the issue of adaptation. We discussed mitigation, I think, at length, but you also briefly mentioned about the limitations to adaptive capacity. So I would like to ask you if you could further elaborate on possible consequences of those limitations and what needs to be taken to make sure that those adaptive capacity limitations would not lead to further conflicts. For instance, like migration is always considered as one type of adaptation, but there might be limits to migration or any other adaptive capacities that you are very well aware of. So if you could just elaborate on those kind of limitations and their possible implications, possible consequences, and how we might be able to reduce the consequences.
Yeah, let me say another area where we really need to collaborate and see how to do a joint research also, that when we did the 1.5 IPCC report and wanted to come up with, that how mitigation actions in across different sectors and all options, how they are linked to the sustainable development goals, whether they are positively linked or negatively linked. That means they are causing trade-off or not, right? So there we could not get enough literature for adaptation. So adaptation and SDG link were very, very less. So we could not do the similar exercise for mitigation. I think this is extremely important because in mitigation, we could come up with a very a deeper insight that of all the sectoral mitigation, it is the energy demand side actions provide you highest synergy with the sustainable development goals. So it helps you to decide as a policymaker where to put action first so that sustainable development goal and mitigation both happens. In case of adaptation, we could not find enough literature. So there is also need for doing actually this systematic review itself. That has not been done in adaptation. So that is something which is very important, which we did for mitigation that can be done for adaptation. But what we did only this time was only for the SDG 5, right? For SDG 5, what is happening? So in sustainable development goals, one interesting point we found that if we look into different sectors, right? Say, for example, the nature-based solution in the food sector or in human settlement. So different sectors of adaptation, if we look into, and the different actions on adaptation side, that's institutional, technological, similarly, then we could see that in the ecosystem-based um, adaptation projects, um, there is more synergy with the gender equity. So ecosystem based adaptation projects are more gender equity enhancing. But in urban areas, we saw that they are less enhancing. Or in ocean sector, adaptation actions are less gender, are more gender blind because they are restricting many of the women's participation in many of the cases. So, I mean, we could identify, because I said that we have looked into 400, actually we searched through 8,000 um, literature, and 400 were useful for us given the purpose. And so 400 case studies, you can say, we looked into from across the world, right? So we could find that where are the positive things happening. So wherever there are little bit of training of the women, there is more technology training. So there, women are capable of taking the leadership in the new projects, and they need more information also, so they are sometimes excluded from giving information, and that is because of the social practices and cultural practices. You can overcome those by providing them the information through mass media and many other ways, so that you find them and bring them into the process. So I could see that there are entry points which can be made for breaking this barrier between the adaptation action and the advancement of the sustainable development goals.
Thank you very much. And it's good that you also mentioned all these gaps in the literature, because one of the uh, uh, objectives of NERVs is to contribute to filling these gaps. So now we understand some of these major gaps, and uh, I would like to use this platform to also invite all the attendees, if you would like to contribute to this kind of research activities. We at NERVs welcome all those kind of contributions, and we would be happy to coordinate those kind of activities. And I'm sure Professor Roy will also stay in touch with us, so we can further develop these ideas in the future. Uh, so again, we still have time for questions. So if you have any questions, please share them. And it's almost the time to actually close the session, but we can accommodate one more question. And
Okay, well, taking this opportunity, may I ask one, which
sure,
is
yes.
very different type of question. Very recently, there's a kind of gender gap ranking, which is like Swiss-based some think tank announced it. Japan is ranked at the last in the major developed country like G7, and even like lower than China, lower than South Korea. So the neighboring countries, we are the last. So then you you said that you are familiar a bit about like Japanese societies and so on. So how do you see like any kind of potential risk or some adverse impact of achieving the SDGs goals for Japan, or carbon neutral kind of target achievement? How that is somehow related to these gender issues? and so on, because this is
Yeah.
one of the most kind of critical goal for Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And we know the issue, but then we do not really have a very effective way to quickly achieve the goal. So if you, from your perspective, if you have any uh, sharing views and advices, it may be very appreciated. Thank you.
It's a hard question, but but what I can say is that my observation is that I'm giving some experience. I'm sharing some experiences, and which made me to think. Right, when I go and see and talk, and I have friends, and then that's how I come to analyze. Right, because those gives me the vision within the social structure also, right? So I think structurally, um, Japanese, many of my Japanese friends actually left their jobs after they got kids or they got married. So this leads to some kind of mental stress, right? So if I look into the mental health, right, then this is something which is not providing a liberating experience to the women who have the capability to participate in the larger system. So, which simply means is that the work culture or work system might have to change, right? So that you can combine both and you can provide. So I feel that sometimes I see many of my friends going out at 4 a.m., coming back at 12 midnight, and even did not have time to talk to their children also for the whole week. I don't think this is something which is good. So yes, GDP is very high, and we are having very high personal income. But if I miss my the affection, love, which makes my quality of life better, which makes my life more meaningful, then we have high GDP, but not high well-being.
Mm.
So that's why I'm saying we need to define our humanities progress with more additional and accepted metric going beyond GDP, so that these things can come within, can get valued within the society also. Otherwise, we are just looking into the market mechanism, and that's only what is sold in the market and which is bought in the market, but not in the human society, right? So I think there is really hard research that which environmental economics, ecological economists have started doing, but I think we really need to focus on that to come up with this. I don't think we are too far now from solving this, but we need a little more push.
Thank you.
Very much, yeah. Very good advice to all of us.
I didn't want to be an advisor.
Thank you very much.
No, actually, this COVID gave us a significant opportunity
Exactly.
in one sense.
To revisit.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I have hurt anyone in my Japanese friends. No,
No,
I
I
don't
think
want to.
most of
Yeah.
all agree with this. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
I said that it is better not to brush something under the carpet, just bring it up and dust it, and then we have a
Exactly.
cleaner and nicer home, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think the conversation is becoming very interesting, but unfortunately, we're
Yeah.
getting close to the end of the session. So, on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to once again thank you very much, Professor Roy, for the very stimulating talk. I also would like to thank all of the attendees for your patience and for joining us today. So before closing, I would like to invite all of you to visit our website at nerps.org for upcoming events and also for more updates, because we usually have like 2-3 talks with distinguished researchers, professors, and policymakers every month. So please follow our newsletter and subscribe to our newsletter. Also, I would like to let you know that there's NERVS webinars. We started doing them because of the COVID situation. We couldn't have face-to-face meetings, so we decided to use this opportunity to keep the momentum. And hopefully next year, we're planning to have a big conference from March 1 to 5. So we will have also announcement about that conference. And we really hope that all of you can join us during the conference to have more effective conversations. So thank you once again for joining us. And we hope to see you again in our future webinars and also during the conference next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.